I'd like you all to try and imagine you're 11 years old again and think about what sort of feelings that brings back for you. I'd assume for most, you've been brought up in a family where you've got at least one parent or carer who's got your best interests at heart and believes in you. You probably go to mainstream school. You probably enjoy school. You haven't had the pressures of exams and tests yet. So life's fairly good. Your biggest fear, your biggest worry, your biggest stress, who's going to be your best mate next week? How does that make you feel? Comfortable, happy, supported, loved? Some people don't feel that. So now I'm going to ask you to forget everything you've just imagined, and I want you to imagine you're a different 11-year-old. This time, you're an 11-year-old who's already experienced and witnessed a severe amount of physical abuse. You've had to defend your mother from many of her partners, sometimes using a knife, and you've suffered horrific violence at home. You don't go to mainstream school. You never have gone to mainstream school. You were diagnosed at 5 with ADHD and emotional health issues. So you go to a school for kids with special educational needs, but you don't really go there. You don't attend because you're not mad. You don't want to hang around with the mad kids. So you're not at home because it's not a very happy place, and you're not at school. So where are you? You're out in the streets. And who are you mixing with out in the streets? Similar people who've had similar experiences. You've got friends who've gone to prison. You've got friends who've been murdered. You've got one friend who has witnessed his mum being murdered by his dad. This is you at 11. And you start to go into offending yourself. So you get arrested, taken to the police station, then you go to court, found guilty. And you think you're going home, but you're not, because the police say, sorry, your parents can't care for you. You're going into care. So you go to social services and then to a care home. How does that make you feel now? Depressed, unloved, confused, unwanted, stressed and angry. And I've said for you to imagine that this isn't actually something that I've made up. This is someone that I know. We're going to call this person John. That was his experience for the first 11 years of his life. And I want to go on and show you how that's affected the next 11 years of his life. So John's continued in that strand of offending, and eventually, at the age of 14, he's found guilty of possession of a firearm. He's caught with a gun, live ammunition, and a serious amount of drugs. So he goes to prison, or he goes to a secure unit, which is a prison for young people under the age of 15. They can't control him there, so he's then moved to a young offender institute like Feltham. And he's in there for a year. And he's got lots of social skills, this lad, so he networks and he learns new skills. And he comes out, and guess what? He uses them and he offends. And this continues. And he's run away from care by this time, and mum won't have him back. So at 16, he's in a hostel, or he's in lots of hostels, changes every 2 or 3 weeks. So he moves all around London. He can't even make a cup of tea, but he's expected to look after himself. Things start to pick up at 17. He finally gets his own place. However, 2 weeks later, he's arrested for murder. So at 17, he's sent to Belmarsh Prison, the youngest prisoner there, AA cap prison, where his cellmates are terrorists, murderers and rapists. Again, these are the people he's networking with now. 2 years later, he's released. He's found not guilty of the murder. His co-defendant's found guilty, given life with a minimum of 30 years. So that's another life wasted from that murder. So John comes out, finds out mum's moved back to Jamaica. She hasn't had any visits in the last 2 years. Mum's moved back to Jamaica, dad's a street drinker. Where does he go? Goes to local authority first, but no, you're over 18. Not a priority. Got to look after yourself. We try and go to other local authorities, and he's told, comes in off the streets, wearing the clothes he's been sleeping in with his sleeping bag, and he's told, well, you're a big fella, you look like you can handle yourself. Off you go. Now, he's got no money, so he can't pay for rent, he can't pay for any sort of deposit. So where's he going to stay? He's staying at crack houses, trap houses, with people he shouldn't be staying with. And there's this constant cycle that goes on now. It's homelessness, offending prison, homelessness, offending prison. And this is John's life at 22. Everyone's given up on him. He spent 7 years in prison on 6 different custodial sentences. Bit of a sad story, really. And what are we doing to stop it? Because we're paying our taxes, there's services out there. And yeah, there's lots of services, and lots of services got involved with John. And before the talk, I sat down with John and we went through a list of some of the services. And this is just a few of them. Social services, youth offending, drug services, housing workers, youth workers. The list goes on. So all of these agencies have worked with John. And these agencies, they cost money. It costs us, the taxpayer, money. And the Department for Education last year, they brought out a tool to estimate how much each service cost each person. So we used that tool, and this is the figure for John at the age of 22. This is how much he's cost society. £1,012,590. And believe me, that's an underestimate, because that doesn't include legal aid, and he's had a lot of court cases. So why are we spending all this money, yet it's not working? Well, I asked John, what's happened with these agencies? And he said, well, I've not engaged with them. Well, why not? And the reasons he gives is because look how many agencies there are. Look how many professionals there are in each agency. I have 5, 6, 7 from each. So there's 40 people I've got to work with. And they're not in it for the long term. They're in it for 6 months maybe, and then they close the case and refer on. Or they get a promotion, or they've had enough and they leave their job. So it's inconsistency. He's coming from chaos. He wants consistency. I say to him, yeah, but these are professionals. They're experts in their field of work. And he said, well, that's the thing. They're professionals. They work 9 to 5. They tell me when they're going to support me. They tell me what I need. They don't listen to me. And they're not there when I most need them, which is generally in the evenings when I'm out in the streets. So inconsistency in professional boundaries is what's restricted him from being able to access those services. But, hold up, there's a bit of hope. There's someone who we've not mentioned who's not restricted by the professional boundaries. Someone who's been there from the very beginning. Someone who's helped feed and clothe him, who's helped support him and his family, and has been consistent. The local drug dealer. So John has chosen to go with the local drug dealer, who some say seen the potential and is grooming him. Others say sees himself in John and sees this is the only way to get him out of that situation. However you see it, it's a sad state of affairs that we're spending over £1 million on services, yet the young people are choosing to follow the drug dealers. And I think that's something that we really need to look at as a society. And I mean, if I'm honest, if I'd been through that situation and I was coming from that chaos, would I go for the 40 different people trying to work with me or the one consistent person? I'd definitely go with the one consistent person. So I think we are letting people down with the agencies that we're providing at the moment. But that's John. We're going to come back to John a bit later on. I'm going to introduce myself now. George Turner, as you can guess, worked with young offenders. Been doing it for around 12 years. Started to work my way up in my career, getting a good reputation, having some good successes, messing up here and there as well, but doing well all the same. And this was going on up until about 2 years ago, where I applied for a job and I didn't get it. So that hit me. And then at the same time, well, about a week later, I hear that a young person I've been working with for a few years has been murdered. He was shot in his head. So that's another funeral that I've got to go to. And these two things made me sit back and reevaluate what am I doing with my career? I started off, I wanted to help people. But the last 2 years has been focused on hitting targets and making savings. That's not what I came into it for. So I thought, right, let me sit back and look, what have I done that's worked well? Move away the things that hasn't worked. What have I done that's worked well and helped people? And the more I looked into it, the more I saw it was actually the voluntary work that I was doing. And this was in two forms. The one form was boxing. Now, I'm not a boxer. I never have been, never been that interested. But the young person I worked with wanted to go boxing, so I took him down to Fitzroy Lodge Boxing Club, which is the one at the top. There, I saw the work that they were doing with helping people control their emotions, with discipline, but most importantly, welcoming them into the boxing club family. And these boxing clubs are a family to people. We've got Earlsfield Boxing Club there as well. And we had the inspirational Mick Carney, who I haven't got, 18 minutes isn't long enough to talk about him. He was an amazing man, a volunteer and a role model to thousands. But we had the boxing. I thought, right, that works. I need to keep that element. The next element was the unofficial volunteering. So when the best way to describe it, I'll go back to John. John I worked with from the age of 11. He was sentenced to my programme, Intense Supervision Surveillance Project. His punishment for his crime was that he had to spend 15 hours a week with me for 6 months. You'd think that put anyone off offending. And we worked really well, and we saw real good progression. Everything was going fantastic with him. And then 6 months later, close the case, step back and watch it all go back to square one again. And I thought, no, John still wanted that support from me, so I still offered it as much as I could in my spare time. And I did that with other young people as well. And we've got them here. I've blurred out their faces, these guys, because I don't want it to affect their chances of employability because they're offenders, or ex-offenders. These guys, worked with them, they've been through terrible things, but they really improved their life, stopped offending, but couldn't get work. So we set up a programme where they volunteered to support young people in Acton who were at risk of joining gangs. And they did fantastic, and they all got Borough Commander commendations for that. And they then moved on to paid work, because they said, yeah, I've got a criminal record, but look, the police are supporting me. So these elements, I thought, right, we've got to focus on these elements and bring them together, and we did that by setting up a charity. I did it alongside Mark Wygate, who's the head coach at Fitzroy Lodge. He was one of the very few people that I knew was in it for the right reasons. And we named the charity Carney's Community because, sadly, we started it up just after Mick Carney passed away 2 years ago. And the purpose of my talk is to talk about sort of the ethos behind the charity, but also what I think society needs to start focusing on as well. And it's best summed up using a few key words. And those are long-term, consistent, unconditional support and empathy. What I mean by them, long-term. With John, worked with John for 11 years, and he needed that support in the long term. It wasn't, right, we're going to work with you 6 months, we're going to put a time limit on it. It was, we will support you for however long we need to support you. As I said, 11 years, but it's still going, that support. And it's consistent. It's not consistently 15 hours a week, but it's consistent in that we're not telling you when you need to change. You're telling us when you want the support, and that's when we step it up. And that's what John did. He was in prison, and his daughter was born, and that was a turning point for him. And he contacted me, went down there, we put together a work programme, and when he was released, he was homeless for 12 months, but he stayed focused, something I don't think I'd have been able to do. And did so well, showed so many strengths that we were able to link him in with an employer, and he's now been working there 7 months. He's had a pay rise, he's had a promotion, and most importantly, he's paying back his debt to society, very slowly to get that million, but he's paying his taxes, and he's also a role model to lots of other young people who know him and have seen that he's come through it. We've then got what I think is probably the most important part of it, which is unconditional support. Unconditional support is what any good parent gives their child. We will support you no matter what. No matter what horrible crimes you commit, we will support you. We won't allow you to commit those crimes. We won't allow you to get away with it. We won't put consequences in place. It's not that. It's any good parent puts boundaries there for their young people, and consequences if they break those boundaries. That's what young people want. That's their safety net. So we ensure we do that, but we support them at the same time. Leading on to empathy. Now, what I mean by empathy is not sympathy. It's understanding where people are coming from. And again, I'll go back to the intense supervision surveillance that I was doing. We had another young person called Clive, who was the first person who was referred over to me. He came to me because everyone else refused him. I didn't want to work with him, but he was the first client, so I had to. He disgusted me. He was a 17-year-old boy who sexually abused a 3-year-old girl. Not what I came into this work to do. If it was down to me, I'd have had him locked up with his bits cut off. Didn't want anything to do with him. But I had to do the job. Through the next 6 months, that's where I started to get some empathy. I could see what had led to him committing those horrific acts. I found out that he didn't go to school. He rarely left the house. He wasn't allowed to. He had significant learning difficulties. He'd been raped by well over 30 men. His mum was a gambler, and from the age that he could walk, he was the stake. She lost a game of cards, he'd have to go and perform oral sex on her opponent. This is the life that he was living. In his world, the adults abuse the children. It happens in my world, must happen in everyone else's world, so that's what I'll go out and do. By building up that empathy and understanding that, we were able to first inform the authorities of what had happened and get the people who had been abusing him arrested. We ensured that he served his sentence, which he had to do to learn that what he had done was wrong and not acceptable. And we were then able to move him out into another family where he was able to be supported and to thrive, and has not offended since then. That's, again, 11 years ago. So these are the key elements of the charity, and this is what I think we need to focus on in society. With these young people, we need to forget about all of the moral panics that the press give us, and forget about blame. It's all about blame. Forget that. We need to look at the root causes of why these consequences come in place. We have to. And we've got a quote here that I like. We can never judge the lives of others because each person knows only their own pain and renunciation, which is key. So I'm hoping I've demonstrated these young people, they can thrive. They've got so many skills and talents, but in order for us to help them rediscover that and for us to rediscover it, we need to offer them empathy and understanding, long-term, consistent and unconditional support, and most importantly, we need to ensure that we don't judge them unless we've actually walked in their shoes, and I hope that most of you never have to. Thank you.